So I'd like to welcome everybody to the final session in our Effective Synchronous Web Conferencing series. My name is Sam Enneman in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, though, just a few housekeeping and session guidelines. So first of all, if you're having any kind of sound problems, click the audio button and just check your sound. If you experience any kind of technical issues during the session, please call WebEx support. The number is 866-229-3239. And if you need to temporarily leave the session, if you would, in the emoticons menu, click the coffee cup to let us know that you've stepped out temporarily. And finally, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and ask your question via the microphone. And at any time, feel free to type in comments or questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat for sure. We are recording today's session, and I'll be sending you a link to the recording by the end of the week. So I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Our session is Presentation Materials That Pop. Dr. Bobby Hobgood, the director of the Language Resource Center, is going to be your presenter. I met Bobby in a web conference a few years ago, so I can tell you that he has a lot of experience, has great ideas, and I hope that you'll pick up a few yourself today. And just to let you know, Bobby is also an adjunct professor in the College of Education, where he teaches advanced foreign language methods online. So he's got a lot of experience, and please welcome Bobby Hobgood.
Great, Sam. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be with you all today, whether you're joining this experience here live or if you're watching a recording of today's web conference. As Sam mentioned, this is the third in a series of web conferences devoted to effective web conferencing. And to be clear, I'm using the term web conference in contrast to a webinar to emphasize the fact that in a web conference, the design approach is one that is more learner-centered and recognizes the opportunity to engage all of the participants in the event. And by engagement, I mean a number of things, anything from chatting in the chat box, as Sam had mentioned, to using the polling tools and features, the icons that you see just above the chat box, as well as using the microphone to ask questions. So as Sam has indicated throughout this session, if you would like to ask a question using your microphone, you'll notice the raised hand icon that appears at the left of that row of icons above the chat box. So if you would, as Sam just did, if you click on that, then we'll notice that you'd like to verbally ask a question. Then at that point, you'll want to click on your microphone icon so that you enable your microphone and ask a question. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I want to share with you the learning outcomes for today's session. First, to provide you with a set of principles for good design. And it occurred to me the first time I gave a presentation like this that the design principles we'll be talking about today apply not only to synchronous web conferencing, but they are also applicable to designing presentation slides you might use in a face-to-face setting, whether it's a class that you're conducting on campus or maybe a conference presentation. And at the same time, these principles apply to our design of our online courses. So if you think about the way in which you're using Canvas, whether you were teaching completely online in a hybrid format, or if you're simply using your Canvas shell to enhance a face-to-face class, the principles and ideas for good design that I'll share with you today are applicable to all of those contexts. I also want to give you some techniques to improve visual clarity of those slides, and we'll explore that in greater detail a little bit later on. And finally, we'll wrap up with techniques to improve the content clarity of your slides. So before we go any further, I just want to do a check with everyone and make sure my audio is coming through okay. If you can hear me, would you click the green check mark, please? Okay, fantastic. I know I waited a little bit late to ask for that audio check, but I'm glad that I did it and I can see everybody's on board. So let's start out with a design approach. Let's talk about some principles for good design. And I'm going to encourage you, not normally, but with respect to design, to be a little crappy in your approach. And CRAP, in this case, as you can see, is an acronym because we need one more acronym in education. I'm sure you don't have enough. So CRAP encompasses some important perspectives on designing those slides. The first is making sure you pay attention to contrast, the distinction between the elements on a particular slide or in a particular space that help to increase understanding. That you also pay attention to repetition of visual images or elements throughout a set of slides or throughout your course as they pertain to creating unity within those slides or the course. That you think about the alignment of all of the elements that are either deliberately and rationally placed to improve clarity. And finally, the role of proximity and the role that it plays with items to convey relationships within a set of slides. So here is an example. I've taken a number of slides from real presentations. And if I ask you, given row 1, which is the row here at the top, versus row 2, the row at the bottom, which one of these rows is a little easier to read? I'm going to ask you all to type that in the chat box. Is it 1, type the number 1, or 2? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. But just to emphasize the point, it's tempting sometimes to engage participants with bright colors, but as you see here, these colors aren't showing up very well. Now, in all fairness, these slides have been condensed, but I want you to keep in mind that even if they had been enlarged, it would be a little challenging to distinguish some of the text here against the background. Further, I want you to think about if you were creating slides for a face-to-face presentation, bearing in mind that there is some distance between you and your audience in the room. You may not be able to control the lighting in the room, and the projector may not be a very strong projector. What if it is an older projector and the colors aren't true? So you need to really pay attention in the design process to the role of contrast. In general, I stay away from anything in row 1, anything like that at all. Remember that we can use strong contrast to emphasize importance through difference. The second element in the design principles I would encourage you to think about is that of repetition. And I've taken 5 different slides here that actually aren't too bad. I wouldn't be so upset if I saw these in a presentation because if nothing else, the individual who created these slides used some nice color images that are engaging, and they used some repetition, i.e. They have call-out boxes that are the same color with a paper clip on them, and the text is white. So to that end, I would say they're paying attention to repetition and unity. However, at the same time, one might say that it's a little jarring to go from one slide to the next in this series with the call-out boxes appearing in different places on the slides and in different sizes. Not that that could be an issue, particularly if you're spending considerable amount of time on each slide, but nonetheless, we could increase the properties and the impact of repetition if we put those call-outs in the same spot on the slide. As you realize, there's a challenge there because visually, with these images, there might be some conflict with the background image. You may not have the same clarity by placing them always in the same place, but we can use repetition to make an impact and to create a stronger presentation, as is the case here, where we see an image that I absolutely love for the side, the organizational side of me. My brain really appreciates here. This is a ship's keel, and the repetition of the planks here throughout this design. And I chose this to help you remember how repetition can create unity in your set of slides. The third element in the design principles is that of alignment. And you see two contrasting examples here. On the left-hand side, some bad alignment where everything has been, for the most part, center justified, versus on the right-hand side where the text has been left justified. And there has been research that indicates when we create a set of slides, a presentation, or even a text, maybe even a syllabus, it's easier for the eye to read from left to right. We've trained our eyes since we started to read, our teachers trained our eyes rather, to read from left to right. And so on the left-hand side, having center justified text is a little bit jarring for the eyes. We're not really sure where to start. Not to mention, notice that underneath the text in both examples, the creator of these slides inserted this, here's a link. It's kind of, again, in different places, and our eye has to track differently to find it. But in the example on the right, everything is left justified, evenly spaced to the edge of the page, and everything seems to flow well together. Now, having said that, you can use center justification for titles. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in our time together today. But for right now, in terms of a significant amount of text on the page, I would encourage you to think about left alignment. Okay. Here's another example of alignment, this time with respect to images. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, images that have been haphazardly placed on a page. And while engaging, those images may be individually, the combination of them all in one place is a bit visually jarring for the eye. It's somewhat confusing, not to mention there's so many of them. Versus what we see here in this example on the right, the darker slide where there are fewer images, they are spaced equally apart along a line, and there seems to be greater clarity there. Finally, the last element in our CRAPI acronym is that of proximity, where we recognize the value of putting alike elements together to communicate, rather, the idea of together versus elements that are apart to communicate difference. So I said that wrong the first way. Elements that are together create some sort of symmetry or a likeness, and those that are apart create difference. As we see here in this first column, first row here, where we have elements together that are united versus down here at the bottom where they're fragmented. At the top, we keep them together to illustrate order, whereas at the bottom, there's more chaos. And then at the top here in this final column, we have elements that are horizontally aligned to give the communicate equality, versus at the bottom where one of them is out of line, communicating an unequal perspective or inequality. Right, so those are, in a nutshell, the 4 elements of the CRAPI acronym, and I want to just pause right here and see if there are any questions or any comments or observations. Okay. If not, I want to give you another example related to proximity. So here is an example of bad proximity, and this applies not only to slides, but as well to any document that you might create or your online course, where we have here at the top a heading, and we have, this is a list of reasons to pay attention, and so there's reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. At least we've got some nice space in between the 3 reasons. And then we have here in fainter text a resource. One might assume that this is a link to something, but there's no space here. Notice what happens when we pay a little more attention to the notion of proximity here. You've got some space between the header, what this section is all about, reasons to pay attention. We have our nice spacing between the header and our 3 reasons. We've even used some color to draw attention to each of the reasons. And then at the end, a resource to get started. We would imagine this might be a hyperlink. We draw attention to that by creating a solid background with nice contrast. We used white or a lighter colored text against a dark background to really draw attention to that resource. So if we go back, here's what our example looked like to begin with: bad proximity versus good proximity. I will issue a word of caution from this particular example. Notice that color has been used here to draw attention to the header. We use green in this header and bold formatting, and then some shade of orange for the 3 items in this list. It's okay to use color to draw attention to items, but be careful and remember that in any group of learners, there's always the possibility you may have one or more who are colorblind and can't distinguish those colors. So if you're going to use color, as I did here, to distinguish an element on the page, make sure that at the same time you apply another type of formatting, in this case, bold. So it's easy to distinguish this as a header because it's bolded, it's a different color, and then there's also a third reason, another way we can make a distinction: size, font size. And if you want to take it a step further, you could even use a different font. But the caution here is to pay attention to the use of color and don't rely solely on color to distinguish elements on a page. Here's an example from one of the online courses that I teach. At the beginning of every module of my course, I create what I call a module overview page, and it always follows the same format so that my students are accustomed to that repetition that I mentioned earlier. They're accustomed to the structure, and you'll notice here how I applied the crappy design in terms of clarity of information on the page, separating out some information here with what is called an activity table, separating out my learning objectives with spacing, with a header, as well my introduction to the module. And then you'll notice here at the top right-hand corner, always including the title of this particular module overview and then the dates in a different color and using this horizontal rule. So I applied that CRAP acronym to this particular part of my course. Okay, I'm going to pause again and see if there are any questions. If anyone would like to audibly comment or ask a question, please click on the raised hand icon above the chat box and we'll recognize you. Okay, I think we're good. If you would, just give me a smiley face so that I know everybody can still hear me, you're still with me. Click on that smiley face icon that you see there. Oh, fantastic. Great. Okay. One of the suggestions I have for you in terms of thinking about your online course and whether you're using your Canvas course fully online, hybrid, or just to enhance your face-to-face course, it's very commonplace and very easy to use your course with all of your modules showing, with nothing but modules. So the first thing students see are the modules, and they see all of them. And I think that's fine, particularly if you're not using your Canvas course fully online or as a hybrid. But I would encourage you to pay attention to what I call the scroll of death, meaning it can be quite overwhelming in an online course if students log in and they see a very long list of items and a number of modules all in one place. That can, I think, really scare students, albeit easy from our end because we just look at this as a place to put all of our stuff, and we think that we've organized it by modules, so that ought to be enough. But I would encourage you to think a little bit about how you can make this a little more friendly and engaging for students by doing things like changing the format a little bit of each of the modules by doing things like giving the modules a real name for each of the modules versus module 1, module 2, so on, maybe including what the focus of that module is. Consider reducing the number of topics or modules in your course if you have the option of doing so. Linking content instead of listing it all on one screen, meaning if you have some elements that are important throughout the entire course, think about linking them from a given page rather than listing them all within a module or here. And then adding a section block or HTML block within your links. And I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about here in just a moment. So here is an example of what I've done to include some repetition in courses. I use some visual elements like you see here that I created with a paint program. And instead of module 1 or module 8, I do have module 8 here, but I also put the name of the module along with the module number. I have the dates of the module, and then as you can see in both of these examples, they both follow a similar structure, so that repetition is present with a module 8 welcome and followed by the module 8 overview. Same thing here, module 7 welcome, module 7 overview. Oops. One of the things I mentioned to you earlier to avoid the scroll of death is to think about rather than putting a whole lot of information at the module level or at the page level, how you can separate out some information as a separate page or maybe even a file so that a single page doesn't look so daunting in your course. Here's an example where I've applied the CRAP acronym, and the link right here, you see, Que Divertido Uno, links the student to another page with more detailed information for this particular section, which happens to be the tarea or the homework for students. So rather than putting all that information here in this overview table that you're seeing, we separate it out and just link that to a different page, which is so easy to do in Canvas. Okay, any questions so far? All right then, let's move on to visual clarity and look at some techniques to improve visual clarity. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but in terms of repetition, something that I'm doing here in my slides, I come back to my learning outcomes. So I create the same slide, and as I'm moving on to the next topic in the presentation or the next outcome, I make that slide visible, and as you see here, I've grayed out or just used gray text for the outcomes that are not applicable to this section. And then I used black text for the particular outcome I'm going to address. Further, I bolded and used a different color to highlight that part of the outcome that is most salient. In other words, in this case, we're talking about visual clarity. So one of the things I like to share with folks, one of my favorite expressions, is to save the decoration for the holidays. While we have access to an array of fantastic images and clip art on the web, it can be a little tempting to put so many wonderful images on the page, but I would encourage you to always ask yourself the question, why is this image necessary? Why am I putting it here? Does it illustrate a concept? Does it reinforce an idea? Does it assist with some sort of behavior or navigation on the part of the learner? Why is that image in place? And always, always try to find a color photograph or a black and white photograph versus clip art, if at all possible. In my opinion, it just adds more professionalism to the experience and can often look a lot neater. Here's an example of a presentation, and this is an honest-to-goodness presentation by someone you might know. If I were in the audience and this slide came up, I might be overwhelmed. Now, in all honesty, I don't know if there was a progressive reveal when this presenter was talking about giving this particular speech. You know, maybe he started with this first row of elements, and then the second row were revealed, and the third row, and so on. Even still, I think there's a lot going on here. So I would caution you to think about what's happening when you create a slide like this in a synchronous session or a face-to-face session. The other thing to keep in mind is that we all do this. When we're sitting in a presentation and someone presents a slide like this, immediately we start to read the slide. Our eyes, our minds start to collaborate to try to make sense of all of the elements on the slide. And what's not happening is that you're not paying attention to the speaker. So think very carefully about visual clarity of your slides. Here's a contrast, right? So behind this speaker, you see the logo of their company. So in this case, clearly the attention is on the speaker. Another technique I would encourage you to consider when you're developing your presentation slides for either a webinar or for a face-to-face presentation is to be careful about the templates that come along with almost all of the multimedia slide software we use these days. This is an example I pulled from one of the well-known multimedia platforms, and as you look at this slide, as indicated here, 45% of this space is usable. All the rest is just, in my opinion, kind of fluff. I don't think it adds anything to the presentation. You might argue that it does create that unity across the slides because it's the same background for every single slide. But I'm really not as concerned with unity if it comes to sacrificing this much usable space. So contrast this slide to that one, 100% usable space. When I worked with the faculty in my department in Languages and Culture Studies, when I worked with our senior seminar students across our language groups, I always talk to them about starting with a slide deck that is clean and clear, in other words, just a white slide, and encouraging them to adopt that versus some template where they're going to be sacrificing some of the usable space. I would also encourage you to think about how you can use white space in your online courses. Now that we have Canvas, you probably know that you can create your own homepage. And that means you can put any number of images, text on that page as if it were a web page or website. Here's an example from our Spanish hybrid program that I created, a masthead with the name of the course here and then instructor details. But I also am careful not to fill up the entire space. You may know that instructional designers talk about the value of white space as it pertains to clarity and readability of a slide or of a web page. One of the design principles we observed when we were putting together the template Canvas courses for our Spanish hybrids program was how we were using, first of all, a common masthead to identify the homepage of the course, the important information of the course, but then also white space so that students aren't overwhelmed by the page. With respect to visuals, I often like to say that they should support and not subvert the message. So this example here, you'll pardon the example, but quite frankly, a lot of people may be more taken by what they see than what they hear, depending upon how a speaker is dressed, in this case, a performer or a singer. In terms of some images that you can use, these are some sites that I would recommend to you. Most importantly, the one here in the center, I think, is the best place for you to find royalty-free images that you can use in public presentations, in web conferences, and in your courses. It's the Creative Commons search engine, and it allows you to search a particular database. For example, you can search Flickr, the online database of images, to find beautiful photos that you can use in your slides or in your course. In all cases, just giving attribution, crediting the image, but feeling confident that you can use that image without violation of copyright. So of this entire list, I would recommend search.creativecommons.org, although the others also provide some great images. In terms of images and color, I love the quote by Klee, who says that color is where our brain and the universe meet. And that's why I personally use, I would say 90% of the time, that Creative Commons search engine I showed you to find some colorful images to reinforce what I'm talking about. If you really want to add some unity to your slide and some impact, I would suggest also that you take advantage of this URL, which gives you insight into how to find the color codes of colors in an image. And once you know those codes, you can then use text that matches those images. So, for example, you're seeing here on the left-hand side, this is that URL, the color codes URL. It then lets you identify particular colors in an image. For example, in this photograph here, the whitewater photograph, maybe you want to get that red in the paddle and use that red for your text instead of the white. That might have been a better choice. And so that's a really useful tool. The other thing, once you get those colors, if you're using either Google Slides or PowerPoint, there is an option. For example, here in Google Slides, when you're choosing color for text or for coloring an image, there is this custom option in addition to this wonderful palette of colors you got here. And so using a tool like this HTML tool I showed you then gives you the hexadecimal number for a particular color so that you can create a custom palette of colors. Another tool that I use is a Chrome extension, and I think you can use this on our campus. I know that there's been some questions about Chrome extensions, but I've used this. I've got it on my campus. It's an eyedropper extension that I use within Chrome, and no matter what web page I'm on, I can click on that extension, and it lets you identify a color, and then it gives you either the RGB values or the hexadecimal values. That particular extension, by the way, I'm going to type in the chat box, is called ColorZilla. ColorZilla. So if you do a search for that, and it will insert for you that extension here in your Chrome browser, ColorZilla. Now, Sam, if I get in trouble for sharing this, my name is something other than Bobby. But I've been using it on campus, and it works great for me. So the third part of our presentation deals with content clarity. And as we saw from our learning outcomes at the very beginning, we want to look at some techniques to improve content clarity. We just talked about visual clarity in this last section. We started out with a set of principles, the CRAP acronym for good design. So let's finally look at content clarity, how we make sure that content is clear in a presentation. So we want to present content in a context that will be remembered. So think about, how do you present your content in whatever your context is, whether it is a synchronous web conference, a face-to-face class or presentation, or maybe your online course, or maybe your course syllabus. And I'll give you an example of that before we conclude today. But how do you present that in a way that it will be remembered? Here's an example, and this is an honest-to-goodness example of a slide that was presented to a general in a military briefing during the Persian Gulf War. Now, what would your reaction be if you were sitting in the presentation and someone presented this slide? I mean, that's a rhetorical question, right? It's a bit overwhelming. Kat is a little confused there. That's a great icon that you presented, but yeah, it's too much. So in the context of a security briefing, this content, is it going to be remembered? Well, I think the answer is the slide will be remembered, but for the wrong reasons. It won't be remembered because the content has observed any particular principles of good design. It will rather be remembered because it's ridiculous. So in contrast to that, I want you to think about, in terms of online courses, for instance, how you organize course documents. And here's an example from one of my online courses where this is what students see on the course homepage. And I've organized all of the course resources and documents they need into a course resources section. All of the information they need for the orientation of the course, as you can see, is organized here into the orientation section. And then I use icons to distinguish and highlight the ongoing Q&A forum in the course, as well as a social forum. I showed you earlier and suggested earlier that you organize in one place in your Canvas course resources. So from the homepage of my courses, my students would click on that course resources icon, and it brings them to this page. And it's a great place where I consolidate all of the files and resources that they need throughout the course. So you see here at the very top, starting with the course syllabus, some information to remind them how to be successful online. And then their major assignments. Notice I use a different header and a different color to then highlight the two major assignments here in this course that are appear here with a different header, but bolded to draw attention to them. And then for each of those headers, all of the resources that they need for that particular assignment. So from the beginning of the course, students can access this section, and it makes sense to them. I would encourage you also, in terms of content and thinking about the context of your content, to create a course layout tour maybe using some screen capture software. One of my favorites I like to use, I'm going to type for you in the chat box, is a free web-based tool that you can also download. It's called Screencast-O-Matic. Let me just type it in here a second time to make it a hyperlink. You can create a 15-minute screencast or screen capture with voiceover. It costs you nothing to create and save this for your online courses. So in terms of that content clarity, I want you to think about how visuals play a role to draw attention to the content and the course elements. So since we're talking about an online course, I thought I'd share with you a technique I use, and that is repeating events with icons. So remember earlier in the CRAP acronym, we talked about repetition in slides. You could do this with slides. You can also do it with an online course. So notice here that oops, thanks, Sam. Sam just reminded me my URL was coming to him and not to everybody. Let me put in here. There's the Screencast-O-Matic. Sorry, folks. But going back here to the use of icons, repeating events, I use a module icon to draw attention to the modules. Whenever there's a reading, use a reading icon and a reminder icon. I would say to you, however, be careful about the use of icons. Make sure you have an icon guide or chart at the beginning of your course or beginning of a presentation, because while in our culture this may be interpreted as reading, this icon here as a reminder, if you're not from our culture, may not speak to you. You may not know that this is a reminder. So it's important to make sure that the use of images helps learners to conform and it doesn't confuse them. Too much variation in terms of color and visual elements can be counterproductive, and it can confuse the content and message in a course. Instead, think about how you can emphasize a section of text through a number of principles that we've looked at earlier. For example, here, these are the learning outcomes I created for this particular web conference. And notice the contrast when we look at this slide. I've applied a simple change to them, that being making bold the aspects of each of the learning outcomes that are most important and most salient. So in this case, we go back, you'll notice if you look at 1, 2, and 3 here, I just applied some bold formatting to these key elements or aspects of each of the learning outcomes. And then in this third example, in addition to bold, I added some color. So remember my caution from earlier, if you're going to use color to distinguish, make sure that at the same time you use another type of formatting, in this case bold. Another way that we create clarity through content is to avoid splitting titles on a slide, on a page. And this comes about because of the technologies that we use, the multimedia platforms. When you designate a couple of lines of text to be center justified versus left justified, the software isn't smart like we are. It can't read and understand text. So for example, here's the title of a paper I delivered at a conference in Limoges, France a couple of years ago. And when I created my slides to accompany that talk, I wanted the title to appear as you see it here on a blank slide, just the text, nothing else going on this white slide. I wanted it to be center justified. And that's great. Center justification with 2, maybe 3 lines of text in the title is fine. But the problem was, as you can see here, the software split up this term, ubiquitous technology, over 2 lines. So instead, I corrected that by just simply increasing that line, the first line, so that the term ubiquitous technology was not split over 2 lines. Here's another example of how we use some design principles and formatting to really make an impact in our syllabus. So this is the syllabus for our Spanish hybrid program, and you see here on the left-hand side the before, where over time the syllabus had been passed on from one instructor to another, content was added, and maybe some of that content was inserted in the wrong place. And so the end result was a syllabus that was a bit overwhelming and daunting for students. You notice here the after of this syllabus, where we added a nice header with some color, UNC Charlotte logo, horizontal rule, some important content information at the top. We used spacing. We used numbered lists, headers again with space, to further illustrate the difference we made. On the left-hand side here, information about the materials for the course appeared under this header here at the top, materials, which was underlined, and it was in a bulleted list. But notice how we made it a little more, we increased the clarity, and the word I like to use is readability of that section by placing each of the required materials in their own cell of this table, and then in the adjacent cell, the details about that particular resource. Further, we elaborated on one aspect of the course, how they were going to get started in the online platform of the course, by applying some formatting here, inserting an image that related to the content. A couple of other ideas before I go on to them. I just want to pause and see if there are any questions. Okay, I'm going to take the silence as no. As you see here in the bullet, the Dilbert cartoon, bullets can kill. Again, another danger, I think, of the templates that we use in multimedia software is that we tend to overuse bullets. And I recall once attending a presentation where the presenter had 12 bulleted items on a slide. 12. And to make matters worse, that individual read all 12 of the elements. Think about the impact or lack thereof on the participants. Likewise, in this example, you can see here where bullets have been used, and while all this information is organized well, this is a lot of information for one slide. So I would encourage you to think about the number of bullets on a slide, and that can vary depending upon how long each bullet is. Some people want to say between 3 and 5 per slide. But also the idea that maybe we can break up some of this content across slides. So if it's important that all this information be communicated, is it necessary that it all appear on a single slide? Okay. I'm not sure why this slide is in here. I'm going to skip over that one. This really brings us here to the end of our time together this afternoon. So I want to pause for one final time and see if there are any questions or comments. If not, I just want to remind you that today we looked at a set of principles for good design, the CRAP acronym. We integrated some techniques to improve visual clarity, and finally, content clarity in web conferencing and in an online course. So having done all that, that brings me to the end of this session. And I will turn it back over to you, Sam.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bobby. And I'd like to just encourage everyone to give Bobby a nice round of applause for that. And actually, maybe if you would, before we leave, if you would type into the text chat one thing that you learned from Bobby today that you'll be able to apply in your presentations going forward. Just one thing. Go ahead and type that into the text chat if you would. And while you're doing that, I'd just like to tell you about an upcoming webinar that we have next week, a very timely one on final grade preparation in Canvas, so that you'll be able to easily and accurately and successfully upload your grades from the Canvas gradebook to Banner. So that's on April 21st, and I encourage you to sign up for that webinar so that you won't have any problems as you're doing that. And then finally, I would like to offer everyone, we're here in the middle of the afternoon, I'd like to give everybody some treats, and so here I offer you your own virtual treat. And maybe if you want to, tell us which one is your favorite. And I'll put mine in there for sure. Well, Bobby, you can have them all. They're virtual. I'll be happy to send you the slides so that you can look at them all the time. So again, thank you all for attending, and just a reminder that we are recording this session, and I'll be sending a link to the recording by the end of the week. So thank you again, and we hope to see you at future webinars, web conferences, and CTL workshops. So thanks for coming.